Hello and you're very welcome to this video this is part 2 of sustainability and ethical consumer behaviour for a junior cycle business. So this video is very much focused on all the different definitions. In the last video we talked about some of the general ideas that you might have relating to and kind of contextualising where this chapter is. Now we're going to look at some of the key definitions that are terms that you'd want to know in this chapter. And in future videos, we're going to look at is applying these definitions, applying the concepts that you've learned to different areas and different examples. So today we're going to be defining what sustainability and sustainable development is. We're going to think about what the issues are with sustainable development. We're going to look at what sustainable consumption means. We're going to look at what ethical consumers are and what ethical goods are. We're going to look at the idea of what the word boycott means. And we're going to look at the idea of corporate social responsibility. And then we're going to look at the impact of ethical consumerism and what impact that's had on businesses as a whole. So the first thing I want you to do and think about is I want you to think about what does the word sustainable and sustainability and sustainable development mean to you. So pause the video for a moment and have a think about what you think those mean. When you're ready, move on. So the first key word we're going to look at is sustainability, and this means using our resources in a way that meets our current needs but also protects these resources to be used by future generations. So when we say resources, think back to what we learned what you would have learned in the start of first year regarding the different types of resources that you have. So you've got your, say, financial resources, your physical resources, natural resources. So think about those. Okay, so it's using those that basically look after our current needs, so it does what we need them to do now, but also can be used in future generations. So instead of using lots of non-renewable resources, that we try to use renewable sources instead. Sustainable development then, on the other hand, is when an organisation, so a country or a business, is when they're developing or when they're growing or when they're expanding, they use these resources then that will basically allow them to do what they want to do now, but it also means that they can protect these resources for the future as well. Next thing I want you to do is what do you think of the challenges with sustainable development are? Sustainable development was so easy, surely everyone would do it all the time. So what issues might firms face, or individuals or organisations or government face when trying to encourage sustainable development? Have a pause the video there now and think about that for a second. So some of the challenges, and this is not a fully exhaustive list, there are more answers than this, but some of the challenges with sustainable development is population growth. It's said that by 2100, the world's population is going to be growing to 11 billion people. These people have the population has a lot of needs, and sometimes using unsustainable methods can be a quicker, cheaper solution. So it can be an awful challenge to try and develop sustainably and meet the needs of the current and growing population. We've limited energy resources. The amount that individuals use is increasing and the planet can only produce a limited amount of resources. So as you have more and more people looking to use these resources and looking to produce energy, the problem is can we continuously meet these goals and targets? Global warming. It's another massive intro. Global warming, for those that don't know, is the temperature of the Earth rising due to greenhouse gases and CO2, carbon dioxide emissions. This is having a massive effect on our sea levels and on the weather systems and storms and severity of the storms we're experiencing. As a result of that, it can have a massive effect on us willing to engage in sustainable development and being able to do so. So moving on to some more other important definitions that we need to look at, there's sustainable consumption. So if we break it down, consumption comes from the word consume. Where's it gone? Consume. There. Okay, so if you think about the word consume, it's using something for your own needs. So using stuff sustainably. So it's when we buy goods or services ourselves as individuals that don't harm society or the environment or the economy. Some other definitions now we're going to look at is the idea of ethics now. So what does an ethical consumer mean? Well, we already know what a consumer is. Okay, a consumer is someone that buys goods and services for their own use and not for resale. But what does the word ethical mean? Well, it comes from the word ethics, This is where consumers choose goods and services that meet their needs and also reflect their moral values. So what I mean by moral values is basically, is something right or something wrong? So for example there, if say someone, for example, feels quite strongly about the use of, say, child labour in their products, well then they might go and only purchase products that they know are guaranteed to be made by people that are not, firms that do not use child labour, for example. Another word here is ethical goods. So ethical goods are goods produced in a way that is kind to the environment and also to the people that produce them. An example here of ethical goods would be, say, for example, fair trade goods. So say fair trade bananas and fair trade coffee. But we'll look at these more examples in more detail in the next lesson. The next thing I want you to think about is the idea of a boycott. Think about what a boycott is. You may have heard of these before. A boycott is a voluntary act of protest in which consumers refuse to buy from or deal with a particular company. This can be for a wide variety of reasons. Perhaps consumers disagree with how the business is operating. They feel they could be exploiting workers, or they could be dumping stuff into the environment, which is affecting the environment negatively. Pause the video for a moment and see if you could think of an example of a boycotting that you've heard of in the news at all recently. Another key definition is corporate social responsibility. Now let's break this down because there's a lot of key things here. Okay, so the word corporate, as we know, relates to a corporation. In other words, relates to business. Social, okay, relates to society, so the general public. And responsibility, that's the idea of being responsible. So it's how the business can be responsible to society, is a really nice way of putting it down. So it refers to organisations acting to benefit society and or the environment. So if you break down the words, the key words in the key term, you can find your definition fairly easily off that. So now, folks, what I want you to think about is, what is the impact of ethical consumerism on businesses? So if consumers, people buying goods and services for their own use, are acting in an ethical way, so acting morally right and have a certain set of morals that is protecting the environment and the welfare of different people, what effect does that have on businesses? Pause the video for a second and have a think about that for a minute or so. So here are just some examples of increased of the impact of ethical consumerism. Well, there's an increased emphasis on CSR. CSR stands for corporate social responsibility. Businesses have realised its importance with consumers, the importance of being ethical, and the positive publicity it can have. So therefore, what I mean by positive publicity is that if a firm operates in a very ethical way, it can create lots of good news stories, and consumers like hearing good news stories about a business. There's an increased focus on green consumerism. Green consumerism, as you can imagine, is green is often referring to the environment, so environmental consumerism. So this considers the impact of consumption on the environment. So for example, the development of green cars or like electric cars, environmentally friendly electric generation methods. So say, for example, solar charging or solar panels, wind energy, etc. Also, there's the idea of the carbon footprint. So the carbon footprint is the approximate measure of how much greenhouse gas is emitted by you, either directly or indirectly. So folks, that brings us to the end of today's lesson. So you should now know how to define sustainability and sustainable development, the issues with sustainable development, sustainable consumption, ethical consumers and ethical goods, boycott, corporate social responsibility, and the impact of ethical consumerism. As I say, these definitions you shouldn't have to learn off by heart, but should be aware what each of them mean. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions, please ask them below in the comments. If you like this video, give it a like, and why not subscribe to the channel as well. Thanks very much. See you next time, folks.